The Harmonic Convergence, Chapter 7, Destination Alexandria. We all bid our farewells to Orca, our beautiful dhow boat that had nurtured us on our journey this far. She moved rhythmically with the waves as we left her alone, tied up to the ancient gnarled tree in Whangaroa harbour. It was difficult for us to say farewell, as we knew that by leaving her unattended, the elements of nature would cast a heavy toll on her. It was inevitable that she would be battered and broken into pieces against the shoreline rocks. Solace came from knowing that she would be returned to the elements, to Gaia, and that her spirit would always live in our hearts. Now, standing in the crystal chamber, we were ready to be teleported to the Temple of Thebes. Irama, who had extensive knowledge of crystal frequencies, programmed the crystals to the same frequency as the Temple of Thebes, and with skilled precision, she scheduled our arrival for 2,000 years before the birth of the fabled Christ. As we stood waiting in the chamber, with excitement and joy in our hearts, our senses were once again infused by the fragrance of the plants and pollens and the animals of Thebes, and slowly the entire chamber was filled with this beautiful aroma. The chamber recreated the frequency of our destination, and we could sense all that existed in Thebes before we were transported there. An intense light show of colour danced all around us, and it was absolutely stunning to behold. An electromagnetic discharge coursed through our bodies, raising the hair on our skin, and in an instant we found ourselves gathered in the Temple of Thebes. We were delighted to see Ariana, who was there waiting for us, a huge smile across her face, and we all hugged and greeted her with animated delight. I looked down a timeline and saw the massive tidal waves that were created by the lunar arrival, said Ariana. And knowing that this temple would survive, and that you would arrive here also, I decided to make the timeline jump. How wonderful, I said, and hugged Ariana tightly. We wondered what had happened to you. Irama stepped forward and held Ariana's hands. Ariana, what timeline are we actually on right now? She inquired. Just before we made the jump, the complex harmonic frequencies indicated a sudden variation. I was not sure whether the crystal frequency grid we were jumping from underwent a subtle or large frequency change, making our destination timing uncertain. We were aiming for a time frequency destination to arrive here 4,000 years prior to 21st century Earth. Well, began Ariana. The location frequency was perfect. However, because of the massive Earth changes that occurred at the time of your departure, you have arrived approximately 2,000 years after your planned frequency destination. Really? Laughed Irama. Earth is undergoing a huge reset, said Ariana, and your crystalline time jump frequencies accommodated those changes. Oh, isn't this exciting? Exclaimed ShaMaRa. I just love time jumping. There is always an element of surprise. We all laughed and exclaimed together, for we were now standing in the Temple of Thebes, 2,000 years before 21st century Earth. When our excitement had subsided, we noticed others from our light family who were standing beside Ariana. One by one, they introduced themselves. "Hello," said Imra, and bowed his head in greeting. "My name is Imra." A woman with 2 children was standing beside him. The 2 children, who were identical twins and around 13 summers, also introduced themselves. "I am Nishara," said one of the twins. "Oh, that is also my name," laughed Nishara. "Ah, in that case," said the twin, "please call me by the name that is used with close friends and family, and that is Asteria." "And I am Naira Shah," chimed the other twin, "and my personal name is Minerva." "I am Enki," smiled the mother. Our exuberance radiated out from us and could be felt by everyone as we all hugged and made exclamations. The family were starseeds from Celestes, from the Celiano system in the Pleiades, and they are known as Celations. The Celations have light blue skin, a quiet, soft energy, and are physically very beautiful. "All right then," said Maxim, rubbing his hands together. "Are we all ready to go? Let us find our beautiful boat, Orca II, which was left for safekeeping with the custodians of the temple. We need to provision her for another adventure." "Yes, Maxim," said Dulkara. "You must be delighted to be back on this timeline when you built Orca II." As we walked through Thebes, which was considered to be the capital city of Egypt and one of the most majestic cities in the ancient world, our excitement intensified. "Are you familiar with Thebes?" inquired Imra. "I only have vague memories of Thebes," said Dulkara. "Well, we know it well, so you are with the perfect guides," said Enki. Thebes was built to honor the divine, the living and the dead, and to immortalize the heritage and legacy of the greatest civilization of the world at that time. "And if I am correct," said Altar, "Thebes is approximately 800 kilometers south of the Mediterranean Sea, and 670 kilometers south of the ancient city of Memphis." "Ah, your memory serves you well," said Asteria. "Memphis is known in Earth's future as Cairo and is constructed on either side of the Nile River along the east and west banks." Asteria pointed to an area of the city. The necropolis, or the City of the Dead, is situated there on the west bank and is filled with numerous royal tombs and mortuary. These temples still exist in 21st century Earth. "You will notice that between the river and the drier surrounding areas," said Minerva, The floodplains consist of a thick layer of nutrient-rich Nile silt that has been deposited throughout a millennia of annual Nile floods. "Ah, yes," I said. "How wonderful!" "It certainly is," declared Asteria. "The river rises every year in June, and for the next 4 months will cover the floodplain with 30 to 50 centimetres of water. These water-filled, shallow, natural basins capture silt deposits across the floodplain." "Then," interjected Enki, "after the floodwaters recede, these now water-saturated basins are planted and the crops are harvested in late autumn and winter. During this time, farmers grow a bountiful array of wheat, barley, sorghum, pulses, onions, and melons." "Oh, how delicious!" declared ShaMaRa. "And what a wonderful way to grow food." "Indeed," said Imra. "These vegetables are grown in huge quantities, and the quality is high due to the wondrous rich silted soil of the Nile." We all cast our eyes over the beautiful azure skies, rich green fields, dark blue river, golden hills, and crimson sunsets with a fluorescent afterglow. "I simply adore the landscape," said ShaMaRa. "Isn't it glorious?" said Enki. "Thebes has the appearance of an over-imagined painting." Together, we walked past the Karnak temple complex, and standing in awe, we were mesmerized by this magnificent village construction. During the New Kingdom, the Karnak temple complex was developed over a period of thousands of years. The collection of temples, sanctuaries, pylons, statues, and scores of sphinx and other decorations were added on, generation after generation, by pharaohs who were unparalleled in their grandeur throughout Egypt. "What an incredible temple complex," said Dulkar-Ra. "Karnak is divided into 3 compounds," explained Minerva. "The precinct of Amun, the precinct of Mut, and the precinct of Montu. In Earth's 21st century, Karnak is still the largest spiritual structure ever built in the world." "It is interesting to note," added Imra, "that Amun, the personality who claimed to be the Egyptian god of the sun and air, is also known as Amon, Am-Mon, and Amen, and was regarded as one of the most important gods. Amon ruled the ancient Egyptian civilization during the beginning of the rise of the New Kingdom." Can you believe that over 80,000 servants and slaves were assigned the task of serving Amon-Ra in Karnak? Exclaimed Asteria. "And don't forget," said Minerva, "that 5,000 statues were erected in his honor." "Yes, I know that," giggled Asteria, and giving her sister a gentle push, she continued with her delivery. "As a result of the religious, political, and economic power wielded by Amun, Thebes prospered. Amun was credited with having freed Egypt from its enemies, making Egypt the wealthiest and most powerful country in the ancient world. And this established Thebes as the queen of cities," interrupted Minerva. So was Amun one of the Dark Ones? Inquired Cyndriella. Yes, he is one of the Dark Ones, replied Minerva, her piercing blue eyes focused on Cyndriella. And this is also why, in Earth's future, Christians say Amen at the end of a prayer. It is to honor this Dark One, Amun, or Amen. Well, the Bible was written by the Romans, said Imra. They wanted to mind control people into worshipping them. Ah, yes, the Dark Ones control all religions, said Irama. Eventually, we reached the pier where Orca II was waiting for us. Oh, how wonderful to see Orca II! I exclaimed with delight. Maxim put his arm around my shoulders and laughed. Oh, Samira, isn't it glorious to be seeing her again? Orca II was a larger dhow boat than her predecessor, Orca. However, she was just as beautiful. She was 62 feet long and slightly wider. Therefore, she had more underdeck space and could accommodate not only more people, but larger quantities of food and water. She also had longer lee boards, which are of greater benefit since the weather patterns had now changed and storms were less predictable. Just look at these magnificent lee boards, said Dulkara. Yes, confirmed Maxim. The lee boards, one on the port side and one on the starboard side, are 4 meters long and hinged to huge engineered bronze pinnacle bearings. These lee boards assist in increasing the stability of Orca in large ocean seas. With great excitement and anticipation of our forthcoming voyage across most of the known world, we released our mooring lines and slowly moved off. As we stood at the stern of Orca II, a sense of unity encompassed us. We all looked back and were mesmerized by the majesty and beauty of Thebes. It was breathtaking to see the early morning sunlight cast the first shards of light across the city, illuminating the sandstone statues and temples with a rich glow of iridescent gold. Slowly, this majestic city faded into the distance, and our collective joy could be felt by everyone. We were all experiencing the realization of yet another adventure into the unknown, and our excitement was building into a crescendo. We have an 800-kilometer voyage ahead of us to the north, announced Maxim, before heading west into the Mediterranean Sea. We prepared refreshments and all settled into comfortable positions, some of us slumbering on the killam cushions on the deck, others lying in the hammocks, and Maxim at the helm. The Nile seems to be incredibly high, said ShaMaRa. The Nile always swells in the early summer, said Maxim. The flood starts rising as a result of the heavy tropical rains in the Ethiopia highlands. The summits of those highlands reach almost 15,000 feet into the sky. 90% of the volume of water in the Nile occurs during the floods, said Dulkara. The monsoon rains from Ethiopia flow into the Blue Nile and the Atbara River, and then directly into the Nile itself. I witnessed this magnificent show of nature on my last journey along the Nile, said ShaMaRa. The flooding has been cyclic since ancient times. It usually reaches its full flood height in Aswan, in Egypt, in July. Imra smiled and nodded. And it takes about a week for the floodwaters to reach Memphis, he said, or modern-day Cairo, from Aswan. Yes, said ShaMaRa. And to the north is the Nile Delta, with its many meandering tributaries through vast marshlands. Oh, the profusion of bird life there at that time is stunning, to say the least. When the flood rises, said Maxim, it creates a current that we can ride, and hopefully we will catch one of these flow routes to the west of the marshlands and head towards Alexandria on the Mediterranean Sea. We all enjoyed the wind blowing through our hair, the feel of the warm sun shining on our bodies, and the smell of the river pungent in the air. Well, I am intrigued. How do they grow the agriculture in the basins? Asked Cyndriella. Do they use dams? Asteria was eager to answer our questions. Well, yes. She sat up straight, and with flattened palms, she smoothed the creases on her dress. The agricultural land is divided into large fields with dams and dikes that create the basins where the crops can grow abundantly. And, interrupted Minerva, the irrigation of these basins has been cleverly worked in with the seasonal floods. So the people do not need to pump the water, laughed Asteria, and reaching over, she tried to place her hand over her sister's mouth in a humorous attempt to quieten her excitement. Asteria, stop it, laughed Minerva. The water from the Nile flows into the basins, saturating the soil, continued Asteria, as well as bringing silt that is enriched with minerals. Many of the basins have discharge points that allow the water to flow through the canals to irrigate other basins, eventually flowing back into the Nile. Asteria indicated with her hand, further downstream. Well, you both know a lot about the irrigation systems, said Altar. They certainly love to be in front of an audience, laughed Enki. Unfortunately, in the drier years, added Imra, if the upper basins cannot be flooded, there are shortages and famines. However, most seasons are consistent, and the annual silt deposit keeps the fertility of the soil high. The Nile provides nourishment for up to 15 million inhabitants. We prepared refreshments for dinner, and gazing at the sunset, we took turns at the helm, while others fell asleep under the stars. The next morning, Cyndriella seemed eager to learn more about the Dark Ones and how they mind control humanity. I am curious about Enki and Enlil, inquired Cyndriella. There seems to be a lot going on geopolitically about them at this time. The Dark Ones created the Sumerian tablets and also collected the information for the Old Testament, said Altar. The tablets, in both cases, were written with a double code system. It claims that these names, Enki and Enlil, are individuals. However, they are in fact a race of people. Indeed, agreed Maxim. Whenever you see the name of a person in any of the ancient writings, that name actually refers to a race. Even although Enki and Enlil are a race of people, they are, however, not the same race or civilization. They are different from one another. In a nutshell, said Dol-Ka-Ra, the story of Enki and Enlil represents the creation of mind control by the Dark Ones. The concept that Enki is the good brother is designed to create separation. The Dark Ones reverse everything, as well as providing incorrect information, as this creates confusion and division. Yes, well, the Dark Ones are very clever, but they are not very creative, said Nishara. They use the same system of mind control, being separation and division, over and over again. Even in Earth's 21st century, there is the two-party political system. They control both parties, and they do not care who you vote for, as long as you vote for one of them, because they control them both. When you choose one party, one leader, or one religion over another, you are rejecting everything else, I agreed. So instead of unifying differences, they are setting people apart. It is the same strategy that they use in a war. They control both sides and pit one civilization or country against the other. Yes, that is true, agreed Sarah. And Enki and Enlil fought because of their contradicting beliefs. The fight culminated in the expulsion of Akhenaten and his followers, the Enki, from Egypt. Oh, are you referring to the Exodus? Inquired Cyndriella. Akhenaten guided the chosen people to their promised land, Israel, said Irama. This was the Exodus, and it is nothing more than a group of Egyptians who followed Akhenaten. Akhenaten wanted to impose another creed upon them, distancing them from the theological base of Egypt. He wanted to oppose the solar cult of Ra and introduce the cult of the Black Sun, which is the entire millennial religious system. Cyndriella looked perplexed. I thought the solar cult of Ra was about sun worship. Minerva smiled at Cyndriella. To explain the solar cult of Ra, we need to begin with Aton, also spelled Aten, in ancient Egypt. Aten was the personification of the sun and was represented as a solar disk emitting rays. Minerva raised her arms up to the heavens and, making a sweeping gesture, stretched her arms out in front of her and splayed her fingers out towards us. Aten is a radiant sphere with long hands in which he bathes the world in his light. Akhenaten, interrupted Asteria, was previously known as Amenhotep IV. However, he changed his name to Akhenaten. He made significant changes to the religious views of ancient Egypt during his reign and began a new cult called Atenism. Atenism eliminated the notion of many gods and promoted a single solar god known as Aten. And then, said Minerva, leaning forward, and her eyes so wide that I had to suppress my laughter, Akhenaten announced that Aten, the sun god, had appeared to him in a dream. He claimed that he was the supreme and only god, or the incarnation of the sun. And as you can see, said Ariana, this form of monotheism foreshadowed the rise of Western biblical traditions. So, continued Minerva, Akhenaten claimed that only he could access the divine, or rather, that he had an exclusive relationship with God. He advocated the worship of one god, Aten, in preference to all others. But weren't the Egyptians already worshipping Aten? Inquired Cyndriella. Well, not really, said Ariana. The ancient Egyptians did not view the sun as a god. However, they did know that the sun was vital for life, so they acknowledged the multi-armed sun. Yes, they acknowledged the sun, said Asteria, raising her index finger to make her point. Because without the sun, we would have no plant, animal, or human life. They did not, however, worship the sun. Of course, said Minerva, leaning forward with one eyebrow raised. Akhenaten's motivations were only to strengthen his pharaonic power. Many of the people in Egypt, however, were not pleased with Akhenaten, said Irama, and Atenism was not popular. When Akhenaten was expelled and could not work openly any longer, another name was devised for him, and that name was Moses. Moses! Cried Cyndriella. So Akhenaten was Moses? Asteria nodded slowly. Moses, as a lawgiver, promoted a kind of legalistic monotheism. Well, began Altar, Moses took the understandings between people and re-established them as the commandments. Instead of the ethical understanding, it would be better if Moses pronounced that they were commands from God. The commandments became law, and they had to be obeyed. It was all about population control. Yes, said Imra. The people were told that these laws were God's commands, and if they disobeyed them, there would be heavy penalties. Wasn't it Akhenaten, or Moses, who talked to the burning bush and told the people to stay away from worshipping the bull? Asked ShaMaRa. Nishara nodded in agreement. Akhenaten's desperation for power was also an attempt to combat the growing influence of a priesthood, in other words, the Druids, who threatened his position. The Druids? Really? Exclaimed Asteria. After the destruction of Tiamat and the lunar matrix, said Sarah, the Lemurian Lyrian survivors emigrated from Atlantis to the highlands in Ireland and Scotland and became known as the Druids. Oh my! That is fascinating! Exclaimed Cyndriella. Yes, the Druids, or Celts, in Ireland and Scotland established their civilizations before pre-dynastic Egypt, Babylon, Sumer, and China, said Altar, so they predate the Sumerian tablets. And we are the Druids, aren't we? Exclaimed ShaMaRa. We began that Western civilization in Ireland and Scotland. Yes, I laughed, and reaching over, I clasped ShaMaRa's hand. You are remembering. The Celtic Druids were pursued by the Dark Ones in Ireland and Scotland, said Ariana, and escaping from there, they brought their knowledge to Egypt. The solar cult of Ra, or the bull, was the wisdom and knowledge that was carried in the hearts and minds of the Celtic Druids who founded the pre-dynastic Egyptian culture. That is correct, I said. The bull represents Taurus, the area in the zodiac that many Druids call home, and in Taurus there is Aldebaran, where I began this journey in the physical form, as well as Alcyone, Alnath, Zeta, Ain, the Pleiades, and the Hades clusters. Is that why, in most cultures, the bull or cow is revered? Asked ShaMaRa. Yes, I declared. All over the earth, cows and bulls are revered as the highest animal deity in almost all cultures, and it is because these civilizations honor the Taurus star systems. Maxim, who was at the helm, squinting from the glare on the water, joined in the conversation. The Dark Ones then infiltrated Egypt and instigated the beginning of what would be the equivalent of kings, queens, and emperors. In dynastic Egypt, at the beginning of the era of the New Kingdoms, the Dark Ones held the most powerful position that they had ever held in linear time. They were in favor of the privileged and the not privileged. Dul-Kar-Ra nodded in agreement. The pharaohs and kings throughout history are no more than the Dark Ones fashioning themselves as gods to control the perceptions of the people. As we know, when the Dark Ones control the people, they also control their frequency and DNA. Some of these pharaohs and kings, or so-called gods, did exist, and some are complete fabrications. They have been written about to promote division, separation, and fighting. The modus operandi of the Dark Ones is always to create division as a means of mind control. You are so right, said Naishara. It is impossible to know what is true and what is not true. Throughout history, they have removed real people and inserted false people. Or they have made real people into myths. They insert stories and characters whenever they want and change timelines so that each generation is confused and relying on misinformation. This is why it is called his story, said Sarah. Remember, these same so-called gods from Atlantis did not go away, said Ariana gravely. They are still here, at this time, mind-controlling humanity, and they continue with their agenda right up to the 21st century Earth. As we know, they have very long lives, said Maxim, and that is why they have so much patience. They have many thousands of years to implement their agenda. And that is why we are here now, said Dul-Kar-Ra, to continue to hold that frequency in the times of the New Kingdoms. The New Kingdoms are essentially another reset for humanity. These Druids, continued Maxim, perhaps a few 100,000, are always able to hold a level of frequency stability on Earth and in the solar system with their higher frequency awareness. Absolutely, agreed Ariana. The Druids do not believe in giving one's power over to a god. I am interested to know what happened to the people of Israel, said Cyndriella thoughtfully. What happened after they followed Akhenaten to the Promised Land? The people of Israel, said Sarah, who followed Akhenaten, migrated to what is present-day Italy. The ruling elite in Italy called themselves Caesars. Yes, said Maxim, the Caesars of Egypt were the Israelites who migrated to Italy. I suppose some of the Caesars were like kings or emperors. They were the self-appointed intermediary between the masses and their god or gods. The Caesars then went on to create the Vatican and renamed themselves the popes. The Vatican has been in Rome for a long time, interjected Altar. However, its jurisdiction was changed in Earth's 21st century. The Vatican became independent, or a principality of its own, and not a part of any other country on the planet. In other words, it is an independent country with its own jurisdiction and international law, accountable to no others. It is interesting to remember that Rome never fell, it evolved, said Imra. It consisted of families of Dark Ones and the humans who worked for them. The Vatican is still leading the world in 21st century Earth, as it has done for the last 2,500 years. As dusk settled upon us and the night crept in, we shared an early meal before retiring for the night. The next day, as we continued on our journey, there were more questions about the Celtic Druids. I can't stop thinking about the Celtic Druids, said ShaMaRa. I seem to be remembering more and more about them. I smiled warmly at ShaMaRa. The pre-dynastic Druids in Egypt held a high frequency of love and had an understanding of higher frequency ideas, I said. They knew that all beings are an expression of Prime Creator, experiencing itself through the individual. Irama nodded in agreement. They recorded and taught information regarding medicine, herbalism, technology, and advanced concepts of metaphysics and the connection between the so-called material world and the spiritual world. In a way, said Ankai, her head inclined as she remembered the Druids. They could be compared to shamans, wise men and healers in the Native American cultures. The Native American cultures shared the same kind of information from the same ancestral sources, including the Pleiades. Ariana reached over to take an apple from a tray of fruit. She polished the apple and, taking a knife, began to cut it into segments. The Druids were connected to the mystical, spiritual, etheric world, she said, where they could access spirits, entities, and disembodied people in order to heal. Sarah, who was swaying back and forth in one of the hammocks, got out of the hammock and sat with us also. The Druids knew that there was no physical world, she began, that everything is etheric and interconnected, and there is no clear barrier between the spirit world and the material physical world. They advocated that all diseases, and they mean all, was the result of an imbalance or interference between pure consciousness and the physical world. So, said ShaMaRa, they work with one foot in the spiritual world and the other in the physical world, thereby creating a bridge between the two. Yes, and some people might call this magic, said Maxim. However, in reality, it is pure knowledge and knowing how to apply that knowledge. Well, they had a strong connection to nature, said Dulkara. They do not separate nature from who they are and who we all are. They knew how to use the properties of each plant, how to communicate with the spirits of the trees, and, well, how to speak to the entire forest. They knew how to connect with other beings, including all of the elementals, and how to invoke their characteristics for help. Minerva inclined her head. Well, weren't the Druids also known as witches and warlocks? They were positive witches and warlocks, said Irama. They used their power for good. And like the Navajo shamans, agreed Altar, they could shapeshift or teleport themselves wherever they wanted to go. They also worked with the Gnostics, said Ariana, as well as the bards, who were the storytellers. Well, of course, the Gnostic teachings were also interested in spiritual knowledge, agreed Altar, which was in contrast to orthodox teachings and traditions and the authority of religious institutions. What are the Gnostic teachings? Asked Minerva. Well, Gnostic refers to a frequency of higher truth, I said. The Gnostic teachings are an ancient language, and they cannot be attributed to an individual, a group of people, or even a race. Dulkar-Ra took his turn at the helm, and Maxim joined us on the Killam cushions. The Druids also honoured all differences, said Maxim. They accepted that all people can have different concepts and ideas, and yet all of these different concepts and ideas can be embraced. That is correct, said Dulkar-Ra. In our way of thinking, you can have two contradicting ideas, and they are both correct, even although they may seem to be opposite to one another. This is the meaning of dichotomy. Ah, yes, dichotomy, I said. What a beautiful word. The logical mind wants everything to be right or wrong, good or bad, superior or inferior. Dichotomy, however, means that all ideas may oppose one another. Both are appropriate and valid. This is a fifth density perception. The evolving consciousness integrates everything, said Sa-Ra. All opposing ideas are a part of the whole. This is how the mind of a starseed works. Ha ha! Except for Minerva's ideas, laughed Asteria. They are always creative. Oh! Exclaimed Minerva. You are incorrigible. Well, if we are not willing to integrate different ideas, said Imra, our consciousness will never grow. Reductionism, on the other hand, is when an individual or society reduces a concept down to a bite-sized piece of information. Reductionism is a tendency to explain a complex set of facts, phenomena, or mechanics with a much simpler understanding. The third density mind is mind-controlled to be reductionist, said Minerva, and snuck a wedge of melon out of her sister's hands. Hey! I see that you are still peckish, cried Asteria in a youthful tone. Reductionism, continued Maxim, takes humanity away from a cohesive understanding. The individual becomes attached to stories without understanding why and how metaphysical concepts work. They accept that it is mystical, beyond their comprehension, and they are then susceptible to mind control. A good example of this is the God model, said Naishara. The God model says that you do not need to take responsibility for what you create because a higher power will do everything for you. The third density brain and its thoughts becomes attached to lower mind concepts. That is correct, agreed Enki. And these concepts are kept as possessions that the individual does not want to give up. They have spent lifetimes accumulating ideas, and they hold on to them tightly as though they were clutching a bag of gold. They will even fight to hold on to their beliefs. After many days and nights, quietly voyaging northwards, we sailed past the pyramids and could see the semi-subtropical lush gardens in all of their abundance. At the base of the pyramids, there were stone walkways and many boats tied to wooden wharves. There were fleets of flat-bottomed dhow boats, all multicoloured and adorned with canvas flats, as the Egyptians loved to decorate their craft. The boats, both large and small, looked spectacular on the backdrop of the white shining pyramids standing proudly behind them. As Orca II glided through the water, a sense of serenity and peace pervaded us all. The water beneath the boat rippled out towards the edge of the river, and the pollen grasses, dancing in the soft, dappled rays of sunlight, intermingled with the tips of the reed beds that swayed gently in the early morning breeze. These beautiful reeds, with large brown flowers, were interlaced with wooden wharves that stretched for miles down the river. The warmth of the sun, penetrating our skin, renewed our vitality as we sailed past this magnificent sight. "Oh," I said, feeling solemn, "there is only one sphinx. The other sphinx has been washed away with the tidal wave that was created by the lunar matrix." We all got up, and standing on the deck, our hands shading our eyes from the sun, we took in the scene before us. ShaMaRa pointed at the remaining sphinx. "And I can see a huge amount of water erosion around the base of the remaining sphinx." The realization that one of the sphinx had been washed away by the lunar arrival struck us all, and slowly we returned to our seats on the deck. "So what you are saying," said ShaMaRa, "is that after the lunar tidal waves, the Lemurian Lyrians travelled to Ireland and Scotland and became the Celtic Druids." "Yes, that is right," replied Sarah. "Well," continued ShaMaRa, "I am curious to know what happened to the Atlantean Lyrians after the lunar tidal waves." "Ah, well," laughed Irama, "to answer that question, we need to explore the story of Adam and Eve." "Really?" said ShaMaRa, sitting bolt upright. "Now I am really curious." "As we have already explained," began Irama, "when you see a name in the Bible, it does not refer to an individual. It refers to a whole race of people, both men and women. So Adam and Eve were, respectively, a whole race of people." "Oh, yes, of course," said Minerva. "Remember," began Irama, "prior to the destruction of Tiamat, when the Dark Ones began to repress the Lyrians and use mind control to create a slave race, they could not penetrate the intellect or memories of the high fifth density Lemurian Lyrians. The Lemurian Lyrians knew that they were free and would not be controlled." Ah yes, I do remember that conversation, said ShaMaRa. Well, they became known as the Eves, said Irama. In fact, interjected Ariana, even after the lunar matrix was installed within the Earth's orbit, the Lemurian Lyrians still could not be mind-controlled. They kept their frequency high and could remember who they were. Wow! So not even the lunar matrix could bring them into the third density, said Cyndriella. Actually, said Altar, the lunar matrix does not hold individuals in the third density unless they have been mind-controlled. So what holds individuals in the third density is their own consciousness. And why the name Eve? Asked Asteria. I leaned over and stroked Asteria's glistening chestnut hair. The Taygetan system in the Pleiades, where the Lemurian Lyrians came from, is a matriarchal society, being a system where women hold positions of authority. This matriarchal knowledge was known and practiced by the Lemurian or Evic civilization. So Lemuria is a feminine society, and therefore Eve. Well, what exactly is a feminine society? Asked Minerva. A feminine society, said ShaMaRa softly, is an emotional society and recognizes the integration of love. The Adams, on the other hand, said Dulkara, were the low fifth density Lyrian civilizations who lived in Atlantis. They had come from a low fifth density area of the Pleiades and were, therefore, a frequency match for Atlantis. They became a slave race, created by the Dark Ones. However, the slaves were not created by genetics. They were created by mind control. Ah, I see, said ShaMaRa. That makes sense. And what about the apple in the story of Adam and Eve? Ah, yes, the apple, I exclaimed. The apple, or the forbidden fruit, is knowledge. The Eves, who were both men and women, were empowered with universal knowledge, or the matriarchal knowledge that came from the Pleiades. So, began ShaMaRa, the Evic race shared this knowledge with the Adamic slave race in Atlantis, and their intention was to wake them up to the mind control that they were being subjected to. Nishara leaned forward, her eyebrows raised, and her hand open in a welcoming way. Oh, and later, the Engan and Solation, who were also matriarchal civilizations, brought their knowledge as well. So the apple is the knowledge from the Taygetan system in the Pleiades, as well as the Engan and Solation civilizations. And what does it mean that Adam and Eve were naked? Asked Cyndriella. Does it mean that they did not have the knowledge to defend themselves or realize their own inner power? Bravo, said Nishara. You've got it. Although it was really only the Adamic race who did not realize their own inner power. Well, also, said Altar, it is symbolism that Adam was created before Eve. First, there were the Adams as a people, under the control of the Dark Ones, and then the Eves would arrive to help them. Both races were genetically similar. When Eve was created from the rib of Adam, it means that the rib contains DNA for cloning. This, however, said Ankai, is meaningless if taken literally. The female will always come before the male. The male is always a variant of the female in any species. Yes, of course, agreed ShaMaRa. That is why males have nipples, because the Y chromosome, which determines the sex of the baby, is activated between the 2nd and 3rd week of gestation. The nipples are already formed. And this is undeniable biology, said Enki, and has nothing to do with a feminist agenda. And the serpent or snake in the story? Inquired ShaMaRa. Who or what is that? The serpent is the Taigetan men and women, said Enki, and the Ingan and Solatian civilizations, who also brought their matriarchal knowledge to the Evic race. Yes, said Nishara, although, in actuality, it is not just one snake. It is 2 entwined snakes, and it is used throughout the galaxy as a symbolic reference to medicinal knowledge that is associated with DNA. Well, what about the tree of life? Inquired Asteria. The serpent is on a tree, or the caduceus. I am guessing that the tree of life refers to the medicine that comes from the serpent. Absolutely, said Ariana. The Dark Ones even into Earth's 21st century, added Enki, have never forgotten the feminine society of Eves, and because the Eves are a matriarchal society, they still condemn and invalidate all women because of this perceived betrayal. And, began Ariana, even in Earth's 21st century, the feminine, the emotional, the integration of love is despised in favor of the masculine logic. They even advocate that women with power should act as men and not as empowered feminine women. And yet, said Enki, in a matriarchal society, everything is integrated, including the masculine side. We were all deeply moved by the story of liberation, for we, along with many other Taigetans, were involved in educating the Adamic race. We sat in silence, digesting our conversation for quite some time before any more words were spoken. As Maxim had predicted, we were able to continue sailing on the river's currents, flowing north as we headed towards the Nile Delta. Slowly, the magnificent pyramids that reflected the early morning soft glowing light had slipped into the distance behind us. The pastel blue sky deepened into a sharper azure blue as the sun rose higher in the sky, and we continued on our journey with a sense of joy. Eventually, we reached the end of the Nile, and our heightened sense of excitement was unanimously evident. We all exchanged wide smiles and gentle laughter as we left the mouth of this mighty river and headed out into the Mediterranean Sea. As we sailed towards Alexandria, the water view of this magnificent city was simply spellbinding. And so, my journey continues.